the Big 12 will be surviving. However, if they want to competitively survive, I think Josh Pate on his most recent show hit on something that will be very, very important. So I want to play you this clip. Josh Pate from 24/7 Sports. Definitely recommend his show. I enjoy it quite a bit. I think he is one of the best out there in the game.
I had someone, I'll keep their name out of it. They're very high up in the grand scheme of things in the Big Ten. They said, with this new money comes a new responsibility on our part. And what they went on to explain to me is, in no uncertain terms, the exchange for us cashing these big media rights checks is we got to be good past the top layer. We got to be good past just Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State. Because no one's paying us for 3 teams. They're paying us for a conference product. So they said it's been explained, it's understood at our B and C tier institutions as it relates to football. You guys got to take hiring more seriously. You got to be more aggressive in recruiting. Take football more seriously. Invest to a max degree in football.
Now, you guys know there's a lot of reasons why I'm going to like this clip, because as Wolf58, I see that you're popping in here, and I appreciate you, Wolf58. Getting in here a bit late, but want to lend a hand in your efforts. Hopefully you haven't been too harsh on my beloved Big Ten. I haven't, Wolf58, I swear, but I feel like this is like the kid getting walked in on right now, just like caught red-handed. Like, I am about to take a little bit of a shot here. It's not at your Ohio State Buckeyes. It is very much on the rest of the conference. I swear this was not intentional, Wolf58, and thank you very much for your support of the channel, as always. But I am going to take a bit of a shot at the Big Ten here, because there are plenty of teams in the Big Ten that need that warning that Josh Pate just talked about, or that maybe warning, that scolding. Like, hey, you guys get your bleep together, all right? It can't be Ohio State and Michigan just carrying the torch on everything. The Big Ten West has been a disaster for a very long time and allowed Iowa to just coast into tier 1 of the EA Sports payouts for college football 25, because they've been able to beat up on so many of those teams and play in so many Big Ten championship games, right? Like, if you get beyond the top 2 in that league, and 2.5, the most I'll give Penn State is 2.5. I can't give them any more than that, because they very much feast the same way Iowa does. They just get gobsmacked by Ohio State every single year as well. That's the current state of the Big Ten. They do need more from those schools. And I think that directly relates to how successful the Big 12 can be in this brave new world of college football, if you want to call it that. Again, the Big 12 is not in any danger at this point of folding. I think it's going to be around for a while. But the question is, will the Big 12 continue to be a league that is at least worthy of a decent amount of respect, even from the biggest haters out there, a la being able to put a TCU in the national championship game, even if they will then get, to use my word of the hour, gobsmacked by Georgia in the national championship game, if you can still do that, if you still have a league that is capable of doing that. And that's in this new world where you're going to have $20 to $25 million on your payroll to be paying these players as kind of just like an entry fee if you want to be able to do something like that. Will the Big 12 be able to stomach it? Will other schools be able to use the money? And when I say other schools, it's the lower 2/3 of the Big Ten and probably like the lower, half to a third of the SEC. They do a much better job of being competitive across the board. That's why, to me, it was very telling and pertinent that this came from Big Ten country. But the Big 12 so far has fought like hell to be able to stay alive, even with this gap widening. And I say it all the time, but you see it in the coaches. Lance Leipold, Chris Kleiman, Matt Campbell, like all of these coaches, for the most part, who have been pursued have stayed put. Now, there are exceptions. Jed Fish, if you want to call it that, he coached in the Pac-12 last year, never actually coached in the Big 12, but he left Arizona on their way into the league. And then similarly, Luke Fickell from Cincinnati on his way into the league decided to leave for Wisconsin. For the most part, the Big 12 has kept the highly coveted coaches, head coaches anyway. And that was one area where, like, Andy Staples at one point in time was speculating about, like, could a Northwestern poach a coach from the Big 12, a highly successful coach from the Big 12, just because they would have more money. The Big 12 has been able to fight that off. They have fought and scrapped to utilize all the resources they have. from big, large fan bases to keep those coaches there. And I imagine the Big 12 will fight like absolute hell once again to try to remain competitive here in the new revenue sharing era with all of these athletes. I don't think anybody legitimately thinks, like, I hear this notion a lot. I believe I even heard it on Josh Pate's show earlier today. This notion a lot, like, well, the Big 12 was never legitimately competing recruiting wise with Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia, Bama, like the upper crust of the college football world. So why are we acting like this is really putting them in further jeopardy or that this has really changed? I would push back on that and say, yeah, they have not, and they still won't. But now you're at much greater risk of losing players that you develop to an Ohio State or a Georgia or a Bama because of the transfer portal and free ball and transfers. That has definitely changed. So that will make it a little bit tougher. And yeah, maybe schools were paying guys before. Maybe it was still hard to recruit against the tradition of other schools. But now if it's like literally directly paying, that is still making it a little bit easier. That is removing some of the barrier to be able to do that. So I would still counter by saying that there's an extra advantage to that. But fair enough. You're not going to beat Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia, Bama in recruiting battles. You're probably still going to lose more than you win against Wisconsin, Tennessee, Penn State, like schools on that tier. But the Big 12 obviously can very much hold its own and in most cases dominate like a Mississippi State, Northwestern, Purdue, Indiana, South Carolina, that sort of tier of the Big 10 and the SEC in recruiting. But if that changes, like what Josh is talking about there is that the Big 10 has put out this decree, like you guys have to get better. You have to do more. This can't just be the same thing it's been. You need to invest more in football. And schools like Indiana have tried. Like Kurt Signetti, I think, was a good hire. They're paying him like over $4 million a year, which is competitive if you're talking about in terms of like where it would rank in Big 12 salaries. That's pretty competitive. And they went out and landed 30 kids in the transfer portal and seemingly put out some money to be able to do that. If this changes and some of those mid to lower tier Big 10 schools make a larger commitment and it is successful and they're able to successfully leverage that money, that monetary advantage over you in recruiting, well, now you're in some trouble. Now you're going to lose ground. Now you will start to definitely lose ground from where you were at before and being able to at least be a pretty spunky conference that deserves at least a decent amount of respect. So that's the kind of thing that really struck a chord with me. Like you don't need Purdue. You don't need power to Purdue coming up on your heels and actually being able to flex that power instead of just doing it on coaching hot boards where they think they could poach anybody in the Big 12. If it becomes a reality in the recruiting game, if it becomes a reality and like they're able to take your kids in the portal, like again, it's one thing if you lose somebody to Ohio State. It's one thing if you lose somebody to Georgia. It is another thing if you lose somebody to Indiana. And if that starts to happen because they are able to put so much more into what they're doing football-wise, whether it's hiring better coaches, whether it's much more specifically here, revenue sharing with the players, leveraging the NIL collectives, however they are going to do that, that's where it becomes a real problem. And it is also a place that makes me wonder, like, is this where, I'm not going to say private capital because I've since been corrected on this, but, or not private equity, I've since been corrected on this. Is this where private capital could actually help Big 12 schools? Dan Wetzel, I thought, did an excellent job on one of the latest Yahoo College Sports podcasts of laying this out, that like we keep saying private equity, and that is a really, really negative connotation sort of term. Like you immediately recoil, and I immediately recoiled. And when we think about that entering the college football world, it does not feel good because you think, well, this is going to be terrible news. This is going to be horrendous if you are allowing this to happen. Private equity is going to come in. They'll take some ownership. They'll strip it for parts. And then eventually the sport will be a shell of itself. No, the argument they're making is that it is not private equity because they would not be taking ownership of anybody in the league. They would not be like taking over control of like we get to control the head coach or anything like that. They would just be fronting you some money. It's private capital. They're giving you the capital. They're fronting you some money. in exchange for taking a percentage of your future revenue. And he made the case, and I think it actually kind of makes sense. Maybe that's a way that the Big 12 can keep up here. If you're going to get a greater commitment from the Purdue, Indianas of the world, and they're going to start nipping up on your heels in the recruiting game, can you leverage some private capital to take in an extra 50 million, an extra 100 million, whatever it might be, to try to supplement that and be able to recruit with these guys and still win enough at a level where your revenues can overcome some of that. You'll make more money because of it and be able to pay those guys back and still compete at a higher level in the sport and keep your ticket sales up and just fan interest and overall. That was a very intriguing concept all of a sudden to me. Whereas I think before we all thought of it like, well, Florida State's been talking about it and Drew Weatherford's very involved in it. So Florida State is going to do it to get out of the conference. Like, and it's kind of demonized. Like, yeah, you guys are trying to get out of this deal that you already signed. And even if your lawyers are being creative, and not cool that you guys are doing that. But if the Big 12 can turn it around, or schools of that ilk can turn it around and use it to be more competitive, well, now we might be talking about something here. You might be able to get your boy on board with a little bit of private capital. You got me exploring, like, can I use some private capital in my life? Like, I don't just buy up some real estate, start flipping houses with some private capital and give them a portion of the future revenue. Somebody hit me up. Drew Weatherford, call me.